Well, hello, and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name's Mike Cantrell, and if you haven't been here before, this is the Prison Officer Podcast. Today, I thought I want to talk about wardens. Um, Originally, wardens was a reference to the correctional officer or the prison guard or the turnkey that worked in prisons and jails. But, in a modern sense, it is the administrator who is in charge of a prison as a whole. So, let's talk a little bit about, the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a warden, of working for wardens. Um, there's a big subject there, so let me dig off into this and see what I come up with. Over the last 30 years, I worked for at least a dozen wardens. I was trying to remember the other day. I believe it is right at a dozen. Now, I worked with dozens of others, but I worked under about a dozen wardens from the time I came into the Missouri Department of Corrections as a correctional officer until I went out as a captain and became the chief in the Office of Emergency Preparedness. At that point, when I went to Washington D.C., I didn't work under a warden per se. Now, most of the bosses that I had were wardens, and had come up through the ranks that way. So I was still working for a warden, even though I wasn't working for the warden. So, I started my career in 1992 at Missouri State Pen, and I was trying to remember, and I don't. And I apologize to whoever was warden at that time, but I think that my life at that time and my learning to be a correctional officer, just trying to keep up, the fact that I was working at Missouri State Pen, which is, it was one of the toughest prisons up until the time it closed. In 1970s, they called it the bloodiest 47 acres in America, and when I was there, it still was. But even though I don't remember who the warden was when I first got there, I do remember people talking about what was, to us anyway, a famous warden, which was Donald or D.W. Wyrick. Now he was the warden over Missouri State Pen for years and years, and there were truths and lies and rumors and everything else told about him. I talked to some people who said he was the best warden ever. That throughout the country that people came to him to learn how to run their prisons. That he ran it through some of the hardest times. We were, the times he was there, it was stacked up with inmates, lots and lots of violence. And then you talk to other people, and they say that he was one of the most violent, meanest wardens that they ever knew of. So I don't know. I didn't know the man personally. I know lots of people that do, and people that I trusted who said he was, a good warden to work for. I remember as a young rookie, someone told me the story about the fact that he always carried a pistol inside, which, I mean, these days that's crazy to think about, but I believe that happened more, in the early history of that prison. But the rumor was, or the story was, that he was out on the yard one time and inmates were throwing a football, and the football, either got away from, or they were trying to hit the warden with this football. So the football gets thrown, it's coming right at the warden, and he pulls out his pistol and shoots it right there on the yard, and shoots the football. Now, I don't know if that happened. That's just a story that I heard, so I can neither confirm nor deny that. But must have been a very interesting person, because there were tons of stories, and I don't think I ever met anybody that worked with him that didn't have an opinion one way or the other. They either liked him or they didn't like him. So, that was one of the first references that I had to wardens, and I think there's lots of wardens who kind of rise to that, I don't know, I don't want to say a godlike status, but inside the prison system, it's almost a godlike status for some of those who did it for years, who did it well, who did it in the rough prisons. Uh, people always talk about those certain wardens, but that was my first experience of knowing what a warden was or hearing about a warden, and it was almost a secretive thing because when I was a correctional officer, you didn't see the warden. I don't even know if you saw him when you were getting fired. Uh, the warden was kind of up there in an office, never seen by me out doing my job, working the yard or the housing units. So, but things changed over the years. I went through a couple more wardens that I don't have a big opinion at, and I'm not going to name off any wardens on this show. So if you're sitting there expecting me to name off somebody's name, I'm not going to. If you figure out who it is, that's fine by me. But I went through a couple more wardens after that, and then I got to Leavenworth. And when I got to Leavenworth, there was a warden there who probably was the first warden who made a big impression on me. He was a very large, friendly man, and he knew everybody's name. He came around regularly and shook your hand, and he'd say stuff like, thanks for the job you're doing. I appreciate what you do. And that was new to me. Up until that point, I had not really dealt with a warden in a face-to-face situation. The only time I saw him was when I was getting out of their way when they were coming through. So that was quite a change. And he made a big impression on me with, he really seemed to care. And I could tell you that as an officer, I wanted to work for him. I wanted to do good. I wanted him to come through and notice that my housing unit looked good, that my housing unit was being ran well, just because I felt like he cared. And that was something I took into, as I became a leader later on. So, but he was the first warden I, felt that way about, and that I really felt like he cared about the people. Now, the next warden at Leavenworth, you'll hear people talk over the years about, well, that's just an administrative warden. He doesn't know much about prison, or that is a custody warden, and he came up through the ranks. You'll hear people say that kind of stuff about wardens. Well, the next warden I had at Leavenworth was what they called a custody warden, and he was very staff oriented, but in a hard way. He expected you to be the best, to be at a level that people looked up to, and I felt that from him. He wasn't very friendly, but he expected a lot out of you as a correctional officer. And so I remember him very well. One of the stories I could tell about him, because I was there, and I think the Bureau of Prisons still does it. We used to call it the wine line. And whenever the Bureau of Prisons serves chow, especially at lunch, but sometimes on the other meals, it's expected that some of the administrative people, the captain, the warden, different administrative, maybe education, rec supervisor, those type of people who deal with the inmates, are expected to be in the dining hall so that the inmates can bring them their troubles and they can get those dealt with right away in a face-to-face manner. And so we always referred to that as the wine line, and I never did like it. I still don't. But that had been going on at Leavenworth. That was something that they implemented. So every day, the lieutenants and the officers, we would go in and we would do security in the food service area, and we'd have our back to the walls. There were quite a few fights there, but and then over on one end of the food service area, the administrators would line up and they would talk to these inmates about anything, whether they'd went through the channels or not. So this had been going on for quite a while, and then we got the new warden. Now, when he came through, he came into the dining hall, and went and stood against the wall, not in the normal place, not where everybody else had been lining up for the inmates to go talk to, but he looked more like a correctional officer. He lined up with us against the wall with our back to the wall and a couple of inmates, and they came up to him. They were like, "Hey, Warden, I want to talk to you about something." And I see the warden, and he kind of looks this way and he looks this way. He goes, "Are you talking to me?" And the inmates go, "Yeah, Warden, we want to talk to you. We got this problem." And he says, "Did you talk to the lieutenant?" "Well, no, Warden, we just wanted to bring that." He said, "Did you talk to a correctional officer?" "Well, no, Warden, we just wanted to bring this to you." And he said, "Get out of my face." He said, "Unless you've went through the channels, you shouldn't be talking to me," and sent the inmates on their way. And there were several of us correctional officers that saw that and made us feel good that, somebody was standing up for the fact that there is a certain way to do things. And now some people are going to look at that and they're going to go, "Oh my God, he should have listened to those inmates." But the reality of it is, from a correctional officer and from a custody person's viewpoint, the reality of it is an inmate should try, just like we do in the military, just like a staff member has to do in an organization, should start with the person at the lowest level who can fix your problem. And for an inmate, that is your housing unit officer. That's who that problem should go to at that point. If they can't fix it, then of course you can go to their supervisor, you can go to a counselor, you can go to a lieutenant. And if they can't fix it, then by all means go to an associate warden. And then if they can't fix it, absolutely go see the warden and say, "Hey, I've done all this, but now I couldn't get anything done and I need to bring this to you." And I understand that. But to be able to walk in and see a warden and talk to the top administrator in a prison or in any business without having gone through the channels is just crazy in my mind. And I know, I'm old and I have some old thoughts. I recently was at a training and we were talking about chain of command. And there was this younger girl there, probably, she was in college, so she's 20, 21, something like that. And she said, "Well, our generation believes in a lateral chain of command. We should be able to talk to anybody along that chain of command. I don't have to go through one person to the next." And I sat down at lunch with her and I asked her about that. I'm like, "So you think that you should be able to go from where you're at directly to the top person to get your questions answered?" And she said, "Absolutely." I said, "Without allowing anybody else to do their job before that, you are keeping organizations from working well." And she goes, "Well, why is that?" And I said, "Because you're not letting people do the job they're there to do. We shouldn't have one person dealing with all the problems. The problems should be dealt with at the lowest level." And she said, "Well, I still believe in a lateral chain of command." And I said, "Have you ever looked that up?" And she's like, "Well, no." I said, "Well, a lateral chain of command was something that was originally invented for special forces units in the military. And that allowed them to operate on their own in conditions where they didn't have communication with the people up top." I said, "It has nothing to do with going, straight to the warden or straight to the boss with your complaints or your problem." But I had a good conversation with her. It's just, it's a different world. There's some different thoughts out there, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but I am saying that they cause a lot of problems. Chain of command has worked for a long time, and I do believe in it. So, but anyway, that warden, that was at Leavenworth. And I told you I had that warden who was so friendly and who cared about people so much. I remember we had a correctional workers week, and that's a Bureau of Prisons thing if you don't understand this. President Reagan actually said it's Correctional Officers Week. But, the Federal Bureau of Prisons and a few other places have tried to change it. So you'll see it called Correctional Workers Week so that it includes everybody that works in prison. But that was not the intent of the original day or week. It is Correctional Officers Week, but we'll call it Correctional Workers Week. So it's Correctional Workers Week at Leavenworth, and that warden, I think that year they gave us these embroidered duffel bags. The Employees Club had raised money, and they were nice duffel bags. You could zip the side out, and you could put your shoes in there, and you could put all your gym clothes in the top. And it was, I think it said Leavenworth on the end or something. So it was really nice. But I saw that warden walk to every officer in that institution, and he came in on the off shifts, walked to every officer, and he handed them that bag, and he said, "Thank you for the job you do." And that, as a young rookie or as a young officer, that meant a lot to have a warden come by, and he may not know what I did. Who cares? He made me feel good. He made me feel good about my job, So that was my experience as I left Leavenworth. Now, fast forward. I have went to and started as a correctional officer at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. Now there is a warden there who will remain nameless, but if you worked around him, you'll recognize him. Of all the supervisors I ever worked with, he hated line staff the most. He would regularly avoid speaking to us. He would regularly avoid doing rounds where he had to be alone with a correctional officer or other line staff. I was sitting in the chow hall, the officers' mess one day, and the warden and the two AWs were sitting over in the corner, and I could hear them talking. And they were literally talking about how poor the staff were and how they didn't want them living in their neighborhood. I'm not kidding you. That is exactly what they were talking about. It took me back. But, I didn't have anything to do with them with that. I'm a correctional officer. They're a warden. And so that was some of the first impressions I had of that warden. But the impression that meant the most to me, or meant the worst to me, it's Correctional Workers Week again. And now I'm at Springfield, and I'm working up on the medical floor, and there's an elevator there. And I know, just because rumors get around, that the administrative staff were passing out sandwiches, and they were doing this on the off shift. This is like 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the evening, and shift had just started at 4. But everybody said, "Hey, you're going to get a sandwich tonight for Correctional Workers Week. The administration's staying late, and they're going to bring it to you." And I've done my rounds, done my count. Inmates are still locked down, so I'm sitting down getting my logbooks and stuff started and loaded and everything going. And the elevator opens, and that warden and one of his AWs, who also didn't like staff, came off the elevator. They were talking to each other, rolling this cart with these Subway sandwiches stacked on it. They roll over to the door of my office while they're talking, didn't stop talking, grabbed one of the sandwiches, threw it on my desk, turned around, and got back on the elevator talking the whole time to each other. Now, if you want to talk about, how different that was, to have that one warden at Leavenworth who loved his staff and shook their hands and brought them the duffel bag and said, "Thank you for what you do." And now I'm working for this warden who doesn't like staff and who actually holds staff in contempt. He literally threw the sandwich without saying a word to me. No thank you, no happy correctional workers, or no happy correctional officers week. Literally threw it at my desk and turned around, walked off, never said a word. And that made a big impression, and administrators and wardens have to think about this stuff. They have to think about the effect that they have on the staff under them. That Leavenworth warden, I'd have followed him into a fire. He could get me to do anything for him. I felt like he cared about me and that him and I were gonna, run that prison. I'd have followed him anywhere. That other one probably wouldn't have walked over and peed on him if he was on fire. I had no respect for him, had no love for him, had no nothing. I could have cared less if he showed up to work. I didn't want to see him. He was a detriment to the morale of the institution the whole time I was there. And he trained well after he retired. He went to a sheriff's office and became a detriment to them also. I knew a couple of the sheriff's deputies, and he went in there firing people and just sank morale as low as it would go. So that was my next for foray into a warden, and it wasn't well. Now, over the next few years, and like I said, I had many. There were several of them, and I don't really have any stories, for a few of them. They came in, they did their job, they moved on. I was working hard, a lot of overtime at that time, so I don't think I dealt with them too much, and I don't think they affected me. And sometimes you'll have that. You'll have that warden who comes into an institution, does what they're supposed to, does a couple of years, and rolls back out. And they don't do anything good. They don't do anything bad. And that's just the way it is from the officer's perspective. Now, I'm not privy to some of the conversations and some of the things that happen. But so the next few wardens I didn't know a lot about. Had a warden come in. He was probably one of the most motivational wardens I had. He loved telling leadership stories. He had he came up poor. He came from another country. He worked very hard to get where he was at, and he was inspiring. That's what I'll say about him. He was inspiring. He told us a lot of the hardships he had and the work that it took for him to get there, and how proud he was to be where he was at and to be part of the team that we were all on. And that was the way he talked about it. So he was very inspiring to me. After that, I had another warden. That was I believe she was the first and only female warden that I worked for. But she was probably one of my favorites. I still keep in contact with her today. She is just the no-nonsense supervisor that you want. Have you ever had those supervisors who would let one person do something that they weren't supposed to, and then everybody else would feel like, they weren't being represented? Well, she was the opposite of that. She treated everybody fair. Everybody that came into her office got a fair shake, I felt like. She was also very motivational and was another one of those leaders who I think, even though she would never say it out loud, and she still won't, but I think she's one of those leaders that cared about their people and cared about them deeply and made decisions that were based on what was best for everybody, not based on what was good for one or a few people. So she's another one of those that I learned a lot from. Of course, I was up, I was a lieutenant at this point, so I've moved up into some leadership roles, and I'm looking around and I'm learning from the leaders around me and trying to learn from them. And I learned a lot from her. I also learned, and this is hard sometimes in corrections. Sometimes in corrections we think we have to deal with everything, no matter what it is, big or small. And as a leader, you have to find out that there's some things that you deal with that come to your level, and there's some things that you let the people below you do their job. And that was one of we had, I won't go into it, but we had a certain deal, and she taught me that why am I getting involved in this? Let the people below me do their job, let them take care of it, support them, give them the resources, give them the training if that's what it needs to be, and let them do their job. And I took that, and I remembered it ever since, because doing that allows people to feel successful at work. if they're allowed to do their job and they're allowed to have successes, which as a leader, you should be there doing everything you can to help them have those successes. But if they have those successes, they feel good about work. They feel good about who they are. They feel good about who they are as an employee. So that's some of the stuff I learned from her, and she was, I have very fond memories of working for her when she was my warden. After that, I went and I took a job as a captain, and I worked for one of the toughest wardens I've ever worked for. I will preface everything by saying I think he's a really nice guy. But he micromanaged me to the level that I was about to just absolutely pull my hair out. Things got so bad there for a while that I put a bookshelf next to my bed so that I could have all the policies and all the schedules and everything like that on that bookshelf for when I had to call him or when he called me at 3 o'clock in the morning and wanted an answer. It was a time that I was as stressed as I've ever been in my life. And I know he was. There were things going on where we were working that was causing a lot of stress. And it took me, I think, quite a while, and I may be wrong. Maybe he'll tell me someday I'm wrong on this, but it took me quite a while to realize the reason he, and I'm going to say picked on me, but it wasn't a picked on me like bullying me. It was a picked on me because I always had to be right. I always had to come up with the answer. I always had to be the one to figure things out. But it was because, he had my job at one time in the past and had excelled at it. And so I think when things got tough and he got stressed, I think he fell back to what he was comfortable with, which was my job. And so since he knew my job so well, he expected it to be done only the way he imagined it to be done. So I spent a few years there. That was a tough time. Like I said, a lot of stress. But I was able to lead a really good group of people during that time. And I think because of the situations we were in, some of the stuff that was going on, I think those people probably appreciated it more than any other time I've been a supervisor. What I did, what I stood up for, how I led them. I've had a lot of feedback from those guys over the years. They still contact me to let me know where they're going and how they're promoting, and I love seeing them go up in the rank and succeeding. That's what I love. I love seeing them succeeding. So what else about Warden? I missed one Warden. We talked about those legends. One of the legends I've always heard the stories about in the Bureau of Prisons, and I never worked for him. I met him several times and got to talk to him, and I'm glad I did. He was a great man, but that was Pat Cohane. I think we mentioned when I had Percy Pitzer on here, him and Pat Cohane worked together. But Pat was considered one of those great leaders. He was a custody warden. People looked to him for leadership in those times when things were going bad. And I don't have any specific stories, but I just know that, the places I've worked, that name always pops up when someone says, oh yeah, there was this warden. And so wardens have this effect on the institutions, that they run. And what is that? Warden is a strange job because they have people over them, more so now than other times in history. And wardens have been pushed into more of an administrative role than any time in history. Wardens were left pretty much to their own for long periods of time back when we really started building some prisons in this country, late 1800s, early 1900s, the warden was the person who made the decisions, and every prison ran differently. And then as we brought them together, as we had, a Department of Corrections, a Bureau of Prisons, and we started making rules that affected every prison, then the wardens were reined in a little bit. And they were, they were reined in, and they were made to conform, to run their prison the way an administrator in Washington, D.C. or the state capitol wished. So I don't think we have those same cowboy wardens like we used to, but we still have some great leaders out there who are wardens. I do think, and this is me, I think the best ones come up through, not necessarily a correctional officer, but I think that's the best start for anyone in corrections, working in prison. But there are some good wardens who come up through other channels. I'm just going to leave that alone. But I do think the best way is for them to come in as a correctional officer, at least for a little bit, and see what it's like to run a housing unit and see what it's like to work those shifts. You don't get that in some of the other positions. But no matter what, once you become warden, and this is not just warden, lieutenants have the same effect. Sergeants have the same effect. Captains have the same effect. Those wardens set a culture in that prison. They're the ones who set the culture, who decide whether or not people are going to love their job or whether they're going to hate their job. Can I go that far with it? I think I can. I think the times that I've had those wardens who did not care about the people and didn't care about the prison, didn't care about the inmates, that it always showed, and that morale would always take a deep dive. And then, we'd change wardens, or I'd move, and here you'd have this warden that cared about people, that cared about, the inmates, that cared about the prison, as a whole, the culture of that prison, that people are happy, that people want to come to work. Those wardens set the tone. So as a leader, that's what you need to think about. As a leader, we have that effect. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again. As a captain, if I come through the door in the morning, haven't had my coffee, and start the day by kicking trash cans down the hall, I can guarantee you before the day's out that will affect a correctional officer who will have taken his mood out on an inmate, who will take his mood out on another inmate. And we'll have a fight, we'll have an incident, we'll have a disturbance, whatever, that we might not have had if I would have been in better control of myself when I walked through the door. When you get up in those leadership positions, you affect the people you work with that much. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about wardens. So, thank you to all the wardens I worked for. I do believe I learned something from every one of them. Some of them I learned what not to do, and then some of them I learned what to do. And I think most people could say that about all leaders. Before I go, I just want to thank PEPPERBALL and thank OMNI, Real-Time Locating Systems, for sponsoring this podcast. And I'm going to get this one posted on YouTube. We haven't done that before, but I'm going to get that posted up there, and we're going to get going with this. I hope to see you more on YouTube. But don't forget, the podcast is still at www.theprisonofficer.com, and you can still find the audio podcast over there. So if you're in the car or if you're on a plane, you can still listen to it. If you get the chance, buy me a cup of coffee. The link is there. I don't drink expensive coffee, but that's a way that you can support this show. There are some costs that are incurred by keeping this show going. So I hope all you have a great day. Remember, watch each other's backs out there behind those fences and walls, and be safe.